The woman nobody saw. The line at Mama Chisholm's moved the way Lagos traffic moved on a Monday morning, in small, begrudging increments, with everyone behind you breathing down your neck and everyone ahead of you pretending you did not exist. Adeze Nwosu stood near the back of the queue, with her tote bag pressed flat against her hip and her interview folder tucked under one arm, telling herself for the fourth time that morning that today was going to be different. She had said the same thing before her last two interviews, and before the rejection letter from First Meridian Bank, and before the phone call from her landlord that had come in at 6:15 that same morning, calm, polite, and precise, in the way that people are when they have already made a decision and are only informing you of it. 2 more weeks, he had said. That was all she had. 2 more weeks in a room the size of a storage closet in Yaba, and after that, she would have to call her aunt in Ojuelegba and ask to sleep on the floor of a parlor that already held 5 people and 1 ceiling fan with a broken blade. She had made a promise to herself, standing in front of the small mirror nailed to the back of her door that morning, that she would not let any of that show on her face today. Not at Mama Chisholm's, and not at the offices of Okafor Holdings on Victoria Island, where she had a 9 o'clock induction as one of 12 candidates selected for a 2-week placement assessment, the kind of opportunity that did not come twice, not for a girl from Enugu who had taken 3 buses to get to Lagos and arrived with a degree, a reference letter, and nothing else worth mentioning. The woman appeared in Adaze's line of sight at the moment the queue shifted forward and a gap opened near the front counter. She was small and slightly stooped, wearing a wrapper of faded indigo print over a plain cream blouse, and she was holding her purse in both hands the way elderly women hold things they are not certain they can afford to lose. The woman ahead of her in line, a sharp-faced woman in a blazer who was already checking her phone with the focused aggression of someone who believed her time was worth more than anyone else's, made a sound of irritation and shifted her handbag deliberately to block the older woman's passage to the counter. The cashier, a teenager with box braids and the expression of someone who had long since stopped distinguishing between one customer and the next, called out, "Next!" without looking up. And the blazer woman stepped forward as though the elderly woman simply was not there. What happened next was small, and it happened quickly, and almost no one in that shop paid attention to it. The elderly woman took a step forward to reach the counter, and in doing so, her purse slipped from her fingers. Not dramatically, not with any noise that would draw attention. It simply fell, the clasp popped open, and coins scattered across the tiled floor in a soft, rolling rush. The woman froze. She looked down at her coins and then up at the line behind her. And there was something in her face in that moment that was not quite embarrassment and not quite fear, but something between the two. The look of someone who has learned to expect very little and has just had even that small expectation confirmed. 2 men stepped around her. A woman with a child on her back made a sound with her teeth and moved past. The teenager at the cashier counter said flatly, "Mama, I beg, shift. You dey block other customers." And the elderly woman began to lower herself slowly toward the floor. Adeze was at the back of the line. She had exactly 42 minutes before she needed to be on a bus to Victoria Island. She had her interview folder and her tote bag and the kind of mourning that does not survive unnecessary delays. She watched all of this happen from where she stood, and then she moved. Not quickly, not with any performance of heroism. She simply stepped out of the queue, walked to where the woman was crouching, and got down on her knees on the tiled floor of Mama Chisholm's and began picking up coins. She gathered them one by one, pressing them into her palm, and when she had found what she thought was most of them, she stood and counted them on the counter next to the elderly woman's elbow. The cashier looked at her. Adeze counted again, then reached into the outer pocket of her tote bag, found 250 naira in folded notes, and added it to the amount on the counter. 2 meat pies and 1 bottle of water, she said. For her first. She was not next, the cashier said, looking at the blazer woman, who had already been served and was now watching with the narrow attention of someone who objects to things on principle. "She is now," Adeze said, and her voice was quiet enough that it could not be called rude, But it did not move either, the way a door that is bolted from the inside does not move no matter how reasonably you knock. The elderly woman looked at her. Her eyes were deep-set and very dark, and they moved over Adese's face with a slowness that was not senility, but something closer to deliberateness, the way a person looks at something they want to remember accurately. "You did not have to do that," the woman said. Her accent carried the particular precision of someone who had been formally educated in another era, each word placed with care. "Especially on a busy morning." "I know," Adese said, "but we are already here." They ended up outside, under the neem tree beside the shop, because there were no seats left inside, and the woman moved slowly enough that standing at a counter was not comfortable for her. Adese set her tote bag down and ate her chin-chin standing, and the elderly woman sat on the low concrete ledge beside the tree and ate her meat pie in small, careful bites. Adese checked her watch and told herself she would leave in 5 minutes. Then the woman spoke again. "What takes you out this early on a Monday?" she asked, and there was something in the question, a quality of genuine interest, not polite noise, that made Adese answer honestly. "A placement assessment," she said, "at Okafor Holdings, Victoria Island." She said it the way she would have said it to her mother, a fact, not a boast. "I'm supposed to be one of 12 candidates, 2 weeks. If it goes well, they keep 3. The woman was quiet for a moment. She looked at the half-eaten meat pie in her hand. "And if it does not go well?" "Then it doesn't go well," Adese said. "I'll find the next thing." She said it more easily than she felt it, but she had learned that saying things calmly was sometimes the first step toward believing them. The elderly woman looked at her again with that same unhurried attention. Then she said, "If my son were watching right now, what do you think he would see?" Adese blinked. "I'm sorry?" "It is not a riddle," the woman said, with the hint of something that might have been amusement. "I only wonder, sometimes, what a person's actions look like from the outside. Most people here this morning saw a slow old woman blocking their path. You saw something different. I am curious what name you would give to what you saw." Adese thought about it. "Someone who needed a minute," she said finally, "and was not getting one." The woman nodded, slowly, as though that answer had been placed into a column somewhere and tallied. "My name is Eunice," she said. "Go to your interview. Do not apologize for being late." Adese was 14 minutes late, not 15, because she ran the last block in low heels that were already beginning to protest. As she ran, she did not look back at the neem tree, and so she did not see the elderly woman watching her go with an expression that was not pity and not satisfaction, but something that looked, in the flat Lagos morning light, like recognition. And she did not see, in the moment before she turned the corner, the way the light caught the small gold ring on the woman's right hand, plain and heavy and engraved along the inner band with a logo that Adese had seen on the top right corner of the official letterhead inside her own interview folder. The stylized O, interlocked with a set of angular lines, the mark of Okafor Holdings, pressed into old gold like a seal. The security desk at Okafor Holdings was on the ground floor of a building made almost entirely of glass, the kind of glass that reflects the sky so perfectly that on a clear day the building seems to disappear into it. Adese signed in at 2 minutes past 9, and the security officer told her, without expression, that the induction had already started. She took the elevator to the 4th floor and entered a room where 11 other candidates sat in a loose arc of chairs facing a presentation screen, and a woman at the front of the room with a clipboard and a precisely ironed blouse paused mid-sentence and looked at her with the particular stillness of someone who does not need to raise their voice because their silence already carries enough weight. "You are 12 minutes late," the woman said. Her badge read, Blessing Ease, Head of Talent Acquisition. "We started on time, as will every day of this assessment." She did not add anything else. She simply returned to the screen, and Adese found the only empty chair and sat down and reminded herself that she was still in the room. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, the only thing that mattered right now. She noticed 2 things during that first session. The first was that Blessing Ize's smile, when it appeared, arrived and departed with a precision that suggested it was not a natural expression but a tool, deployed when useful and put away when not. The second was that the assessment materials on Adeze's chair were different from the ones on the chairs around her, not dramatically, not in a way she could immediately point to, but in the way that a person who has learned to notice small disadvantages notices them. Her packet was missing a one-page brief on the company's regional portfolio, the brief that the woman beside her was currently annotating in green ink. Adeze did not raise her hand to ask for the missing page. She read over the woman's shoulder during the break instead, committing what she could to memory, and told herself to pay attention to everything from here. What she did not notice, because she had no reason to look, was the figure who stood for approximately 40 seconds in the doorway of the assessment room at 9:45 before the door swung closed again. He was tall, and he wore a plain dark suit that carried the particular quality of clothes that are expensive enough to look simple, and he stood with the stillness of someone who is accustomed to rooms rearranging themselves around his presence without being asked. He looked at the 12 candidates in their arc of chairs. His gaze moved without haste. It stopped, briefly, on Adeze, on the careful way she was reading the brief on her neighbor's desk without touching it, without embarrassing anyone, without making a performance of her own disadvantage, and then moved on. He stepped back from the doorway, and the door swung closed, and none of the 12 candidates would have been able to tell you, if asked, that he had been there at all. His name was on the building. It was on the letterhead in Adeze's folder. It was on the ring the woman under the neem tree wore on her right hand. But in that room, in that moment, he was only a shadow behind a glass door, watching the way people behave when they think no one important is looking. Adeze spent the lunch break on a bench outside the building with a bottle of water she had brought from home, reviewing her notes from the morning session and rewriting the section of the regional portfolio brief she had memorized in her own words, filling in the gap as completely as she could. She did not go to the canteen with the other candidates. She did not know that the other candidates had noticed this and had drawn conclusions from it, or that Blessing Ize had also noticed and had drawn a different set of conclusions, or that someone else had noticed and drawn none at all, only filed it away in the part of his mind where he kept things that told him something true about a person. She only knew that she had a missing page and a working pen and 40 minutes, and she intended to use them. When the afternoon session ended and she gathered her things to leave, she found a folded piece of paper tucked under the strap of her tote bag. She opened it in the elevator. It was not a note in any formal sense. It was a phone number, written in the small, deliberate handwriting of someone who has always written carefully, and beneath it, one line. In case the morning went well enough to want to talk about it. Eunice. Adeze stared at it for a long time. The elevator doors opened on the ground floor. She stepped out and stood in the glass lobby and looked at the number, and then at the logo on the wall above the security desk, the stylized O, interlocked with angular lines, and then back at the number. And she felt, very quietly, the small and precise chill of a detail that does not yet mean anything, but that your body knows is important before your mind catches up. She folded the paper and put it in the inside pocket of her tote bag, close to where her phone was, and walked out into the evening Lagos traffic and did not call the number. Not yet. The girl who was always last. The second day of the assessment began with a task that was, in theory, identical for all 12 candidates. Draft a 2-page brief on Okafor Holdings' expansion strategy in the Francophone West African market, using only the materials provided in the morning packet. In practice, what this meant for Adeze was that her packet contained 3 fewer source documents than everyone else's, and the one document she had that the others did not was printed in a font small enough that reading it for more than 20 minutes gave her a headache that started behind her right eye and spread like heat through a flat iron. She noticed the discrepancy before she finished the first page of her brief. She did not say anything. She worked with what she had, and what she had was a good memory, one morning of borrowed reading over her neighbor's shoulder, and the habit, developed over years of being under-resourced in rooms that did not think to notice, of extracting more from less without making it look like effort. Blessing Eze moved through the assessment room with the practiced composure of someone who has orchestrated something and is now managing the appearance of not having orchestrated anything. She paused at Adeze's desk twice in the first hour. The first time, she picked up Adeze's packet and flipped through it, said, and set it back down without comment. The second time, she stood behind Adeze's chair long enough that the other candidates glanced over, then walked away. These were not accidents. Adeze understood this with the same low-frequency clarity with which she understood most things that people preferred she not understand. The pattern, once visible, had a logic to it, and the logic was not about her performance. It was about something else, something that had already been decided before she walked into this room, and her job was to figure out what it was without letting on that she had figured it out. She submitted her brief at 11:43. It was 8 minutes before the deadline, and it was, she was fairly certain, the best 2 pages she had ever written on any topic, because she had written them with the specific precision of someone who knows the margin she is working with and has chosen to make each word earn its place. She set it on the collection tray and returned to her desk and drank the rest of her water and waited. The elevator encounter happened on the way back from lunch. Adeze was alone in the elevator. The other candidates had gone to the canteen in a cluster, and she had eaten her food from a container on the bench outside and come back early. And the doors were closing when a hand appeared between them and the elevator opened again. He stepped in and pressed the button for the 7th floor. Adeze was going to the 4th. He was tall in a way that reorganized the proportions of the small elevator space without being imposing about it, and he had the kind of quiet that belongs to people who have learned to be still because they have had too much noise. He looked at the panel and then at her. "You were 14 minutes late on day 1, he said. It was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact delivered in the same tone one might use to note that it had rained the previous Tuesday. I heard it was worth it." Adeze looked at him. She had seen him before, not clearly, not in any situation that had given her a chance to look directly, but she knew the face in the oblique way that you know a song before you know its title. "Worth it depends on perspective," she said. She kept her voice even. "I was late. That part is true." He looked at her for a moment in a way that was neither warm nor cold, but attentive in the way that very few people are attentive, as though he was listening to something beneath the words themselves. "The brief you submitted this morning," he said, "the one that cited the Dakar Infrastructure Index for memory. Interesting choice, given that particular source document was not in your packet." He paused. Or was it? The elevator stopped at the 4th floor. The doors opened. "It was not," Adeze said, because there was no version of this conversation where a lie served her. "I read it over someone's shoulder during yesterday's break. I should have asked for the complete packet." She paused, one foot in the door. "I should have. I didn't." She stepped out and the doors closed behind her, and she stood in the corridor and breathed and asked herself why she felt the particular sensation of a door swinging open in a house she had not known existed. That evening, at 6:10, her phone rang. The number was the one written in Eunice's small, deliberate handwriting. Adeze sat on her bed in the room in Yaba and looked at it ringing for 3 full seconds before she answered. "I was wondering if you would call me," Eunice said, without preamble, her voice carrying the same composed precision it had carried under the neem tree. "Or if you would decide the whole thing was too strange to pursue." "It is strange," Adeze said, honestly. "But you called me first, so I think that makes the strangeness yours to explain." There was a pause, and then something that might have been a laugh, brief and real, not the polished kind. "Fair enough," Eunice said. "How was your day?" The simplicity of the question disarmed Adeze completely. She had been braced for something complicated, some revelation, some explanation of the logo and the ring and what all of it meant. Instead, she got a question that her mother used to ask her every evening when she came home from school. "Difficult," she said, "but I'm still in it." "Good," Eunice said. "That is the part that matters. Go and eat something, Adeze. A person cannot think clearly on an empty stomach." She hung up before Adeze could ask how she knew her name. The third and fourth days of the assessment carried the particular rhythm of managed disadvantage. Not visible enough to formally object to, but consistent enough to be felt in the body by the end of each afternoon. Adeze's workstation laptop developed a recurring problem with the company's internal document server. Her name was not on the list for the small group feedback session on day 3, though the list contained all 12 names when it was first circulated. On day 4, she arrived to find that her chair, the one at the end of the row with the slightly better angle to the presentation screen, had been moved and replaced with one that wobbled on an uneven leg, the kind of wobble that does not cause you to fall, but requires a constant small tension in your body to compensate for. She moved the chair and got a different one from the stack near the back wall. Blessing Eze watched this happen from across the room and said nothing, and her expression was the expression of someone who has played a move and is now waiting to see what the board looks like. What Blessing did not see, because she was looking at Adeze and not at the glass wall of the assessment room, was the man on the other side of that glass. He was not standing in the doorway this time. He was walking past, a tablet in one hand, 2 other people beside him talking, and he slowed, almost imperceptibly, as he passed the glass, and his gaze moved to Adeze and the stack of chairs and the wobbly one she had set aside, and then he walked on. He said nothing to the people beside him. He did not stop. But later that afternoon, the document server in the assessment room was reset by a member of the IT team who explained to no one in particular that there had been a permissions error affecting one of the user accounts. He fixed it in 3 minutes and left. Adeze's files loaded without issue for the rest of the assessment week. She did not know why, and she did not ask. On the Friday evening, at the end of the first week, Blessing Eze called the 12 candidates together for an informal briefing. She had a warmth in her manner that had not been there on Monday, a targeted warmth, like a lamp that illuminates only the things it is pointed at. And she moved through the group, pausing to speak to each person. When she reached Adeze, she stood a beat closer than necessary and said, in a voice pitched low enough that only Adeze would catch it clearly, "You've been resourceful this week, I'll give you that. But resourcefulness is not the same as fit. Some people are impressive without ever being right for the room. I think you understand what I mean." She smiled as she said it. The smile was perfect. Adeze looked at it and said, "I understand exactly what you mean." She kept her voice pleasant. Blessing held her gaze for 1 second longer than necessary, then moved on. Walking to the bus stop that evening, Adeze thought about what the word fit meant, who got to define it, and what it cost a person to be told repeatedly and with great professionalism that they did not possess it. She thought about the wobbly chair and the missing documents and the name left off the feedback list. She thought about a woman under a neem tree asking her what she saw when she looked at someone who needed a minute and was not getting one. She took the bus home and ate the rice her neighbor had saved for her and sat on her bed and looked at her notes from the week. And she did not call Eunice, not that night, because she needed to sit with the feeling without translating it for anyone else yet. But at 10:47, her phone lit up with a message. Not a call, a message, the first one in Eunice's number. It said only, "Second week is harder, rest well." Adeze read it twice. She put her phone face down on the mattress. She thought about the elevator conversation and the man whose name she still did not know with certainty, though she was beginning to form a theory about it that she was not yet ready to confirm. She looked at the ceiling and thought about the ring and the logo and the question Eunice had asked under the neem tree. If my son were watching, what would he see? And the shape of the answer she had given, and she let herself, for the first time, wonder what it meant that she had given it truthfully. The second week opened on a Monday that smelled like rain that had not fallen yet. That particular Lagos pressure, the air thick and holding something back. Adeze arrived 7 minutes early. She signed in, went to her workstation, and found her screen already logged in under her credentials, the document server running clean. She did not remark on this. She opened her notes from the previous week and began reviewing them the way she always reviewed things before a test, systematically, starting from the end. Because the things you learn last are the things most likely to slip. 3 of the other candidates had not returned. Adeze heard, in the fragmentary way that office information circulates, that 2 had withdrawn voluntarily, and 1 had received a call on Friday evening advising that his profile was not progressing further. 9 remained. The atmosphere in the room had changed in the way that atmospheres change when the number of available seats decreases. A low hum of competitive self-awareness, each person recalculating their odds against the new count. Adeze felt it and consciously set it aside. The only math she could control was her own. The new week's first task was a group presentation. Adeze was placed in a group of 3 with a quiet man named Chukwuemeka Bello, who formatted spreadsheets with the focused affection of someone who genuinely loved data, and a woman named Sade, who spoke very fast and very well and had the specific confidence of someone who had always been the most impressive person in every previous room she had entered. They divided the work without conflict, Sade taking the verbal presentation, Chukwuemeka handling the data visualization, and Adeze drafting the written analysis that would be submitted alongside the slides. They presented on Wednesday morning. It went well, genuinely well, not just politely well, and Adeze felt, for the first time since Monday of the previous week, the particular cleanness of work done without obstacle. She let herself have that feeling for the duration of the walk from the presentation room back to the assessment area. Then she put it in her pocket and kept working. Blessing Eze watched the presentation from the back of the room with her clipboard, her face carrying its usual precise neutrality. After the session, she pulled Adeze aside, not in front of anyone, not dramatically, just a brief touch on the elbow in the corridor, a turn into a quieter space near the stairwell. "You did well," she said, and she said it the way people say things they are required to say but would rather not. The written analysis was strong. A pause. "It's a pity the formatting didn't match the company template." Adeze went still. "I used a template provided in this week's materials packet," she said. Blessing tilted her head slightly. "The updated template, circulated Thursday." She held out her clipboard, and on it was a printed email chain, time-stamped. Adeze looked at it. The email had been sent to a group address that included all candidates, but the address for Adeze's account, she could see from the recipient line, had a single character transposed, a typo, or not a typo. "I'll note it in the review as a communication gap," Blessing said, and her tone was the tone of someone performing fairness for an invisible audience. "These things happen." Adeze looked at her for a long moment, long enough to say, without words, that she had understood, and that the understanding had been received. "Yes," she said, "they do." She walked back to her workstation. She sat down and opened her notes. She wrote, in the margin of the page, 3 words, and then crossed them out because they were not useful words, only honest ones. She wrote something more useful beneath them. Document everything. What kindness costs. The accusation arrived on a Thursday, which was, in Adeze's later recollection, an oddly ordinary day for something so precise. She had arrived early, as she had every day of the second week. She had submitted her individual analysis brief by 10:15. She had eaten the mandarin orange at her desk during the morning break and made a note about the distribution model for one of Okafor Holdings' port logistics partners that she wanted to look into further. She was, in other words, doing exactly what she had come here to do, with the specific focus of a person who has eliminated all distractions except the work itself. which was perhaps why the message from HR felt less like a disruption and more like a stone through glass, sudden and then suddenly very loud. The message came through the internal email system at 11:42. A request to attend a meeting with the Human Resources Review Team at 2 o'clock in the conference room on the 6th floor. The subject line was, Candidate Review, Confidential. Nothing else. Adeze read it twice, then a third time, looking for the specific quality of language that would tell her what kind of meeting this was. She found it in the word confidential, and in the absence of any other candidate's name in the recipient field. She forwarded it to no one. She closed the window and continued working until 1:45 because there was nothing else useful to do, and she had learned a long time ago that panicking was only expensive and never helpful. The conference room on the 6th floor had a long table and windows that looked out over Victoria Island toward the water, and it contained, when Adeze entered at 1:58, 2 HR officers she had not met before, and a printed folder placed face down on the table in front of an empty chair. They asked her to sit. They introduced themselves. The man's name was Mr. Fedele. The woman was Ms. Igioma. And they spoke with the particular careful warmth of people who have been trained to deliver difficult information without triggering a formal grievance. Mr. Fedele opened the folder and turned it so Adeze could see. There was a printed email chain, a screenshot of what appeared to be an internal file transfer log, and a letter on headed paper. The allegation, as presented to her, was this: that on the evening of the previous Wednesday, Adeze had forwarded a confidential strategic planning document, specifically a market entry brief for Okafor Holdings' planned Northern Corridor expansion, to an external email address linked to a competitor firm. The file transfer log showed a document of that name sent from her internal account at 7:43 in the evening. The email chain appeared to show a follow-up message confirming receipt. Adeze looked at the documents. She looked at them the way she looked at everything she needed to understand, slowly, from the beginning, with the specific attention she gave things that were trying to tell her something beneath what they appeared to be saying. She noted the timestamp, 7:43 in the evening. She noted that she had left the building at 6:15 that Wednesday. She had her bus ticket in her bag, time-stamped at 6:22 from the stop outside the building. She noted that the email chain used her internal address in the sender field, but not her usual email signature, which she had set up in the first week, and which included a line from her professional bio that she had written herself. She noted that the formatting of the body text was slightly different from the way she had set her email client to default. She noted all of this in the time it took to read the documents once, and then she set them down on the table and looked at Mr. Fidel and Miss Igioma and said, in a voice that was steady in the way that a bridge is steady, not because it is unmoved by what is passing over it, but because it was built to carry weight. I left the building at 6:15 on Wednesday. I have a bus ticket that confirms this. I did not access any internal documents from outside the building because I did not have remote access credentials. Those were never issued to candidates. You can verify both of these things before 2:30 if you want to. Miss Igioma wrote something in her notebook. Mr. Fedele's expression did not change, but he moved the folder slightly to the left, which was not a deliberate action, but was nonetheless the action of someone whose certainty has shifted. We will verify, he said. In the meantime, your participation in the assessment is suspended, pending the outcome of the review. This is standard protocol. I understand, Adeze said. Standard protocol. She sat with those 2 words the way you sit with a pain that is not unexpected. Not because you were prepared for it, but because you had always known, somewhere very quiet in yourself, that it was possible. She gathered her things from the conference room. She was escorted by a junior HR officer, a young man who looked genuinely uncomfortable and kept his eyes on the floor, to collect her personal items from the assessment room. The other candidates were at lunch. The room was empty, and her desk was already tidier than she had left it, as though someone had moved through it before she arrived. She was on the bench outside the building, her tote bag between her feet and her phone in her hands, when she became aware that someone had sat down beside her. She looked up. It was Eunice. The same indigo wrapper, the same cream blouse, the same ring on her right hand catching the afternoon light. Adeze stared at her. "How are you here?" she said. It came out more direct than she intended, but Eunice did not seem to mind directness. "I come to this building often," the woman said, simply and without further explanation. "I saw you from inside." She looked at the tote bag and the folder and the expression on Adeze's face and asked, "Are you afraid?" Her voice was the same as it had been under the neem tree. No excess, no performance, just the exact question. Adeze thought about lying, not dishonestly. She thought about it the way you think about taking a road that would be easier on your feet before deciding to take the one that goes where you need to go. "I'm not afraid of being fired," she said. "I'm afraid they'll believe I'm the kind of person who would do that." She looked down at her hands. That I would take something that wasn't mine to give and give it to someone who shouldn't have it and call it anything other than what it is. She paused. "I'm afraid the paper will say one thing and the truth will say another, and the paper will be louder." Eunice was quiet for a moment. A motorcycle passed on the road in front of him, weaving between two buses, its engine a complaint against the afternoon. "The paper is often louder in the short term," Eunice said, "but it does not have the last word. It only has the first." She looked at Adeze with those deep, deliberate eyes. "What did you do this morning, before the message came?" "I submitted my analysis brief," Adeze said. "I made a note about the port logistics distribution model. I ate a mandarin orange." "Good," Eunice said. "When this is resolved, they will remember what kind of work you did when you thought no one was watching the details. That is what stays." She patted Adaze's hand once, firmly, not gently, the way someone steadies something they believe is already steady, and then she stood. "Go home, eat, sleep, come back tomorrow ready." Adeze watched her walk toward the entrance of the building, and she noticed for the first time, with enough attention to register it fully, that the security officer at the entrance nodded at Eunice. Not the nod of a stranger being politely acknowledged, but the nod of someone who is known, who passes through this door often enough that the gesture has become habitual. The security officer held the door. Eunice walked through as though she had always belonged to the space on the other side of it. Adeze sat very still for a long moment. She looked at the ring in her memory, the logo she had glimpsed on day one, which she had told herself she was misremembering, which she had set aside because the alternative was a thought too large to sit with on a bench outside a building while waiting for a bus. She took out her phone and opened the Okafor Holdings website. She scrolled to the leadership page. She found the photograph she was looking for in the second row of executive profiles, and she looked at it for a long time. And then she put her phone in her bag and picked up her tote and walked to the bus stop. And the thing she felt was not quite shock and not quite certainty, but the very specific sensation of a pattern completing itself. The last piece clicking into a shape you had been constructing without knowing you were doing it. The camera, she reminded herself, the camera in the supply room, the detail she had overheard mentioned in passing by one of the junior HR staff 2 days earlier, in a conversation that had not been about her and that she had not been intended to hear. She had filed it away in the part of her mind where she kept things that had no immediate application but might matter later. She thought about it now, on the bus, with the evening Lagos traffic pressing against the windows and the city performing its usual magnificent indifference to individual crises, and she thought about the file transfer timestamp and her bus ticket and the email signature that was not quite hers, and she thought about what a person with access to the supply room, access to candidate accounts, and a reason to want one specific candidate removed might have done on a Wednesday evening between 6:15 and 7:43. The thought was not comfortable, but it was, she was fairly certain, accurate. She got off the bus and walked the last 2 blocks home and sat on her bed in the small room in Yaba, and she did not cry and she did not call anyone because neither of those things would move the situation. She opened her notebook and wrote down everything she remembered about the supply room conversation. The timestamp, the email signature discrepancy, the bus ticket, and the 7 things she had noticed about the documents in the HR folder that had not quite been right. She wrote them in order and she dated the page, and she closed the notebook and put it in the deepest part of her tote bag, next to the folded paper with Eunice's phone number on it. And then she lay down and looked at the ceiling and let herself have exactly 10 minutes of feeling the full weight of the situation, because she had learned that giving feelings their allotted time kept them from taking more than they were owed. Then she set an alarm for 6 o'clock and closed her eyes. The name on the ring. The message came at 8:47 the next morning while Adeze was on the bus. Not a call, not an email, but a direct message through the assessment platform marked urgent, requesting her presence at the CEO's office on the 9th floor at 10 o'clock. Not HR, not the assessment room, the 9th floor. Adeze read it twice and then looked out the window at the Lagos traffic streaming around them. The Okada riders threading between buses, a woman balancing a tray of ground nuts on her head with the perfect equilibrium of long practice. She thought about the leadership page on the Okafor Holdings website. She thought about the photograph in the second row. She thought about the elevator and the man who had known, without explanation, that the Dakar Infrastructure Index had not been in her packet. She put her phone in her bag and looked at her hands and was honest with herself. She had known, since the bus ride home the night before, that this was where the line of connected things was pointing. Knowing it and arriving at it were different experiences, and the gap between them was filled with the specific and unglamorous feeling of being about to step into a room where the terms of your life might rearrange themselves entirely. The 9th floor was quieter than the floors below it in the way that the top of a thing is always quieter. The noise of the work happening lower, the air different, the quality of the silence suggesting that decisions are made here that reverberate everywhere else. APA guided her to a waiting area with gray chairs and a low table and a view of the lagoon that was so clear it looked, in the morning light, like something placed there for the purpose of reminding visitors what the world looked like at a scale beyond their current problem. She sat for 7 minutes. Then the PA returned and gestured, and Adeze picked up her tote bag and walked through a door. He was standing when she entered, not sitting behind the desk in the manner of a man performing authority, but standing at the window with his back to the door, looking at the same lagoon she had just been looking at from the waiting area. He turned when she entered. He was the man from the elevator. She had known he would be. His name, on the gold plaque beside the door she had just walked through, was Emeka Okafor. "Sit down, please," he said, and his voice was the same as it had been in the elevator, neither warm nor cold, but attentive. She sat. He moved from the window to the chair across from her, not behind his desk, but in the sitting area beside it, the chairs arranged at an angle that suggested conversation rather than examination. It was, she noticed, a deliberate choice. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I know yesterday was difficult." "I'm here," she said. "That's what matters." He looked at her for a moment. Something shifted in his expression. Not a smile, not quite, but the suggestion of one. The way a light changes in a room when a curtain is moved slightly. He reached forward and opened a folder on the coffee table between them. Inside was a photograph printed from a security camera feed. It was clear enough to be definitive. A person at a workstation in a supply room on a Wednesday evening, the timestamp reading 7:31. The face in the photograph was not Adeze's face. "The camera was installed 3 weeks ago," Emeka said. "Part of a routine security upgrade. It records continuously. The footage is stored automatically to an off-site server, not the building's internal system." He paused. The person who created the access log entry did not know about the camera. He closed the folder. "The review team has been informed. The suspension is lifted. The record will reflect the correct version of events." Adeze sat with this for a moment. She thought about the 10 minutes she had given herself on her bed the previous night. She thought about the notebook in her tote bag with its careful documentation of every discrepancy. She thought about what it would feel like to cry in this room, and she decided very firmly that she was not going to do that. Not because she was ashamed of it, but because she had other things to do first. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was level. "Tell me about the woman you had breakfast with outside Mama Chisholm's last Monday morning," Emeka said. The sentence arrived like a key turning in a lock Adeze had not known was locked. She looked at him. His face gave away nothing, no indication of what answer he was looking for, no signal of what he already knew. She thought about what she had told herself on the bus the previous evening, about patterns and their completions, about paper being louder in the short term but not having the last word. She looked at his right hand, resting on the arm of the chair, and she looked at the ring on his right hand, plain and gold and engraved along the inner band, and she thought about an old woman under a neem tree, asking a question about what a son would see. "Her name is Eunice," Adeze said carefully. "She dropped her purse. People walked around her. I helped her pick up her coins, and I paid for her breakfast, and we ate outside because there was no room inside." She paused. "She told me to go to my interview and not apologize for being late." Emeka was quiet. He was looking at her with that same precise attentiveness, but something had come into it that had not been there before. Not softness, exactly, but depth, the quality of a room that is larger on the inside than it appears from the door. "She gave you her phone number," he said. "She's given it to 4 other people over the past 2 years. You are the first one who called her back." Adeze went very still. "I didn't call immediately," she said, because she was not going to be anything other than accurate right now. "I waited until the evening." "But you called," he said. "Why?" She thought about the honest answer, which was also the only answer. "Because she was real. What she said was real, and I don't have so many real things in my life right now that I can afford to set one aside because it's inconvenient or strange." She looked at him steadily. "I also need to tell you something." He waited. "When I got home last night and went to the Okafor Holdings website, I went to look up who owned the building because of something I noticed. A logo on a ring. I had seen it before, on day 1, and I told myself I was imagining it." She met his gaze. "I wasn't imagining it. I recognized the ring on your mother's hand. I recognized it before I walked into this office." She held the pause for exactly as long as it needed to be held. "I'm telling you that because if I don't, and you find out some other way, you'll have reason to wonder what else I chose not to tell you, and I don't want that." The room was quiet for a moment, with the quality of quiet that has weight behind it. Outside the window, the lagoon moved in the particular way that large bodies of water move, slowly, with the impression of indifference to whatever is happening on its shore, and yet always going somewhere. Emeka leaned back slightly in his chair. He looked at his ring, and then at the folder on the table, and then at Adeze, and his expression was no longer unreadable in the way it had been. It was still contained, still composed, but there was something in it now that was closer to the surface. "My mother has done this twice before," he said. "The first time, the candidate discovered who she was from a colleague during the first week and changed his behavior entirely. Became careful, performed, started bringing her gifts from the canteen. The second time, the candidate never connected the dots at all, even when my mother sat in the same chair you're sitting in the day before the final offer was made." He paused. "You are the third. You connected the dots and told me about it rather than using the information as an advantage." "It didn't feel like an advantage," Adeze said. "It felt like information that belonged to you." He was quiet again, the particular quiet of a person who was recalibrating something. "The offer," he said, and stopped, and restarted. The 3 positions that come out of this assessment will be confirmed next Friday. Nothing I've said today changes that process. The panel makes the recommendation, not me, not individually. He stood, and she stood with him, because the quality of the room had shifted again, the conversation moving into a different register. But I want you to know, he said, that what you told me just now, about the ring, about knowing, that is not going to be held against you, not by me. He extended his hand, and she shook it, and his grip was the grip of someone who means what they are doing and does not use more force than is needed to mean it. There's one more thing, he said. As she turned toward the door, she turned back. Blessing Eze has been suspended pending an investigation. The matter of the fabricated evidence has been formally opened. This is separate from the assessment outcome. It is a disciplinary process, and it will run its course through the correct channels. He said this in the same level voice he had used for everything else, but his eyes when he said it had the quality of a verdict already reached. I thought you should know so that you do not spend the next week wondering. Adeze nodded. There were things she wanted to say, things that were large and true and not quite shaped into words yet, but this was not the moment for them, and she understood that. Thank you, she said. She walked to the door. She had her hand on the handle when he said, behind her, My mother said you told her you were not afraid of being fired, that you were afraid of being believed to be someone you are not. A pause. I thought that was a remarkable thing to be afraid of. Most people get those backwards. Adeze did not turn around. She held the door handle and felt, in the length of a breath, the full strangeness and weight of where she was standing and what had led her here. The coins on the floor of a bakery, the woman under the neem tree, the wobbling chair, the falsified log, the camera that had been recording all along. I've always thought, she said, that what people believe about you is temporary. What you actually are is the thing you have to live with. She opened the door and walked through it. Behind her, in the office on the 9th floor, Emeka Okafor stood very still for a moment, with his hand resting on the back of the chair she had just vacated, and looked at the lagoon, and the expression on his face was not one that the people in his professional life had frequently seen. Open, as though a window in a sealed room had been found and pushed outward, and the air that came through it was unexpectedly clean. Blessing Eze did not yet know that the camera existed. She was in her office on the 5th floor, reviewing the assessment score sheets with the practiced calm of someone who has run this play before and knows how the board looks after each move. She was, Emeka knew, good at her job in most of the ways that could be measured, strategic, efficient, effective in the short term. She was not good at the things that could not be measured until they mattered. The investigation file was already open on the desk of the chief HR officer. The footage was already in the system. Blessing would know by end of day. That was tomorrow's problem, properly handled. Today, what mattered was the woman who had just walked through the door, who had been handed information that could have been used as leverage and had chosen to hand it back, who had spent 2 weeks being systematically undermined and had responded by becoming more precise, who had gotten down on the floor of a bakery at 7 a.m. to pick up someone else's coins and had not, at any point, asked to be seen doing it. Those things had a name. Emeka had heard his mother use it once, in a conversation about his father, years before his father died and left him the weight of this building and everything in it. She said the rarest kind of person is not the kind who does the right thing when it costs them nothing. It is the kind who does it when it costs them something real, and still does not make the cost the story. He sat back down at his desk. He had work to do, but he sat with the window open for a few minutes more. What she earned. The news about Blessing spread through the office the way information always spreads through places where people are confined by shared walls and shared purpose. Quickly, in pieces, each piece slightly different from the one before it, the collective picture emerging in the way a mosaic emerges, fragmentary, then suddenly coherent. By Friday morning, the facts as generally understood were these. Blessing Eze had been suspended. There was a disciplinary investigation involving fabricated evidence and unauthorized account access. The details were formally confidential, which meant they were entirely available to anyone who stood near the right corridor at the right time. Adeze knew more than the general understanding and less than the full picture, and she moved through both of those conditions with the specific care of someone who is aware that the ground has shifted but has not yet finished shifting. She did not go to the assessment room that morning. Her suspension had been officially lifted, and she had received a message from Mr. Fidel in HR confirming that her record had been corrected and that she was welcome to resume participation. But she sat in the lobby of the building for 22 minutes with her tote bag on her lap and thought about what resuming participation actually meant, and what she wanted it to mean, and whether those two things were the same. They were not quite. Resuming participation meant walking back into a room where her reinstatement would be visible and noted and interpreted by 8 other candidates who had spent the past 2 days hearing fragments of a story whose center was her. It meant being observed in the aftermath of a vindication, which was its own kind of performance, even when you did not intend it as one. It meant continuing a process that would end on Friday afternoon with 3 names being placed on an offer list, and she still did not know if hers would be among them, and she had no mechanism for controlling that. Only the work she had already done and the work she could still do in the remaining days. What she wanted was simpler and more inconvenient. She wanted to talk to Blessing directly, not because she thought it would change the disciplinary outcome, not because she had anything to prove or any point to drive home, but because there was something unfinished between them, not in the sense of a score to settle, but in the sense of a conversation that had only ever been conducted in one direction, and Adeze had never once been the one choosing the direction. She wanted to choose it once, not for the outcome, for the act. She found Blessing in the stairwell on the 5th floor at 11:15 that morning, which was either chance or the result of Adeze having learned, over 2 weeks, the approximate schedule of a person who uses stairwells as the space where she makes phone calls she does not want overheard. Blessing was not on her phone. She was standing at the window in the stairwell landing, looking out at the street below, and she had the look of someone who has been running a calculation in their head and has recently arrived at an answer they did not like. She turned when she heard the door, and her face went through 3 expressions in rapid succession: surprise, then a very fast recalibration, then something that was not quite composure, but was working very hard to resemble it. "Adeze," she said. Her voice was careful. "I heard your suspension was lifted." "It was," Adeze said. She let the sentence sit for a moment. Then she said, "I wanted to talk to you before the process goes further." Blessing's chin came up slightly. "There's nothing to talk about. The investigation will run its course." "I know that," Adeze said. "I'm not here about the investigation. I'm here because I want to ask you something, and I wanted to ask you directly rather than through a process." She kept her voice even and her hands loose at her sides and her eyes on Blessing's face, not aggressively, but with the full attention of someone who was not going to be made to look away. "Why me, specifically? Of the 12 candidates, you had reasons to want good outcomes for the firm. I understand that, but you chose me as the target, and I want to understand why." Blessing was quiet for a long moment. The stairwell had the particular quality of a space between spaces, neutral, a little cold, the sounds of the building muffled. When she spoke, her voice had lost the practiced warmth and the practiced neutrality both, and what was underneath them was something more unguarded than Adeze had expected. Not remorse, not precisely, but something adjacent to exhaustion. "Because you were good," Blessing said. Adeze blinked. "I'm sorry?" "You were good," Blessing said again, and this time there was a flat anger in it, not directed at Adeze, but at the shape of the sentence itself. Your brief on the first day was better than anything two of the shortlisted candidates had submitted in previous rounds, and you wrote it with 3 fewer source documents. I knew that because I was the one who shorted the packet. She looked away from Adeze, back toward the window. I have been in this building for 6 years. I built the assessment process. I know who advances and why. And I knew that if you made it through the second week without a reason to dismiss you, the panel would have no choice. A pause, during which the sound of a bus on the street below rose and faded. I have been passed over for director twice. Both times the reason given was cultural fit within the senior leadership team. Both times, the person promoted over me was less qualified in every measurable way and happened to share certain qualities with the people making the decision. She stopped. Something moved across her face that was complicated and human and had nothing to do with the version of her that wielded a clipboard like an instrument of precision. I am not explaining that to excuse what I did, she said. Her voice was careful now in a different way. Careful with itself, not with Adeze. I know what I did. I'm explaining it because you asked why, and that is the true answer. I know it doesn't excuse it, Adeze said. She stood with what Blessing had said for a moment, held it carefully, the way you hold something that is both wrong and true at the same time, because those two things can coexist, and it is dishonest to pretend otherwise. What was done to you was not right, she said. What you did to me was not right. Both of those things are true at the same time. And I can be angry about my part of it and still know that your part of it happened inside something larger that is also not right. Blessing looked at her. Her expression was the expression of someone who had entered a conversation expecting a weapon and found instead something they did not have a word for. I came to give you the chance to go to the investigation team yourself, Adeze said. To give a full account and ask for the process to take that into consideration. I don't know if it will change the outcome, but I think you deserve the chance to choose how this part goes, because that choice was not given to me. She waited. Blessing was quiet for a long time. The stairwell light flickered once, a brief protest, then steadied. Why would you do that? Blessing said finally. Her voice was not suspicious. It was genuinely asking. Because I don't want the next 6 years of your life to be defined by a decision you made in 3 days, Adeze said. And because if I were you, in a different version of this, I think I might want someone to give me that chance. She picked up her tote bag, which she had set on the stairs, and she put the strap over her shoulder. That's all I came to say. She turned and went back through the door into the corridor. She was in the lobby again, standing near the security desk and trying to decide whether she wanted to go up to the assessment room or go outside and sit on the bench and think for a few more minutes when her phone rang. Not a number she recognized, not immediately, and then she looked at it more carefully and realized it was an internal line. She answered it. Miss Nuosu. It was Emeka's voice. I was told you were in the building. Could you come up? He sounded different from the way he had sounded in the office on the 9th floor. Not different in his manner, which was still composed, but different in a quality she could not immediately name. Something that had shifted slightly toward an informality that had not been there before. She considered, briefly, whether she was about to walk into another conversation whose terms she could not anticipate. Then she got in the elevator. He was not in his office when she arrived. His PA guided her to a smaller room, a meeting room on the 9th floor that looked over the same lagoon, but from a slightly different angle, so that you could see a portion of the marina that the main office windows did not reach. He came in 2 minutes after her, carrying 2 cups of coffee that he had evidently made himself from the machine in the corridor, rather than asking anyone to bring them, and this detail, the ordinary, slightly unglamorous detail of a man who was the name on the building making his own coffee, was so unexpected that it reconfigured her perception of the room and of him in a way that no deliberate gesture could have done. He set 1 cup in front of her and sat across the table. I heard you went to see Blessing this morning, he said. He was not accusatory. He was not quite anything. in the way that a room is not quite anything when it is waiting to see what furniture you choose to bring into it. I did, Adaze said. I assumed you would hear that. I assumed you assumed it, he said. I want to understand why you did it. Because it was the right thing to do, she said. And then, because that sentence was technically true, but not fully honest. And because I've spent 2 weeks doing the right thing in ways that no one saw, and I wanted to do it this time in a way that was mine, that I chose, not because it would be noticed or because it would help me or because a camera was running somewhere, because I could, and because she needed it, and because that is the kind of person I am trying to be. She wrapped her hands around the coffee cup. I told you in your office that I didn't want you to wonder what else I was choosing not to tell you. This falls under that same principle. He was quiet. He turned his cup on the table once, a slow, deliberate rotation, as though the motion helped him think. She has requested to speak with the investigation team directly, he said. She came to HR an hour ago. It will not change the formal outcome significantly. The evidence is clear, but the way the process ends will be different, calmer. He paused. That is because of what you said to her. It is because of what she chose to do after, Adeze said. I gave her a direction. She walked in it. That's hers. He looked at her across the table, and this was the moment when the quality of the room changed again. Not dramatically, not with any announcement, but in the way that rooms change when something unspoken moves between the people in them, and both people feel it, and neither is quite ready to name it yet. My mother called me this morning, he said. He said it with the specific deliberateness of someone who is choosing to be direct rather than indirect, and has decided this consciously, which for him was not a small thing. She asked me if I had found a reason to talk to you again since Friday. A pause. I told her I had not needed to manufacture one. Adeze felt something warm move through her chest. Not quite embarrassment, not quite joy, but something in the family of both. She has a strong opinion about what your 2 weeks here demonstrated, Emeka continued, and she shared it at some length. A small pause. She is not subtle when she has made up her mind about something. No, Adaze agreed. She is not. He looked at her. His eyes, in the morning light from the lagoon window, had the quality she associated with people who have spent a long time being careful about what they let show, and have recently enough that they are still adjusting, decided to be less careful. I want to call her now, he said, if you are willing to stay for a few minutes. She asked me to, when I had the chance, let her speak to you directly. Not about the assessment, about something else. He already had his phone in his hand. Adeze looked at the phone and at him and at the window and the lagoon beyond it. All right, she said. He dialed. It rang twice. The voice that came through was immediate and warm and carrying the same composed precision it had carried in a bakery and on a bench outside a building and in a phone call on a Tuesday evening. Emeka, is she there? She is, he said. Adeze, Eunice said, and Adeze leaned slightly forward as though the sound of her name in that voice required her to be closer to it. I want to tell you something that I should have told you under the neem tree, but I wasn't certain yet. A pause. I was certain enough to give you my number. I was not certain enough to say the rest. What is the rest? Adeze said. That the question I asked you, about what my son would see, was not really about him, Eunice said. It was about what I saw. I have spent 2 years watching people make choices in difficult moments and learning what those choices say about who they are before everything else catches up to them. You made a choice in 3 minutes on a Monday morning that told me more about your character than 2 weeks in any assessment room ever could. A beat of silence that was warm rather than empty. I am glad you called me back. I am glad you are still in the building. And I am glad my son makes his own coffee instead of asking someone to bring it, because a man who remembers what ordinary feels like is a man who has not been entirely ruined by a good view. Adeze heard, across the table, a sound from a Mecca that was unmistakably a laugh, brief and real, and startled out of him rather than offered. The kind of laugh that appears before you can decide to perform it. It changed his face completely. "Mama," he said, with the exasperated warmth of someone addressing a person who was allowed to say exactly that. "I will call you later." "You will," Eunice said agreeably, and hung up. The room settled back into itself. The coffee was still warm. Outside, the lagoon moved with its usual magnificent indifference to the business of small, specific lives. And in the distance, the marina caught the sun in irregular flashes, like a signal being sent in no particular direction and received, regardless, by whoever was watching. Adeze looked at Emeka across the table. He looked back at her. "The panel meets this afternoon," he said. His voice had returned to its usual register, composed even, but there was something under it now that had not been there before, a warmth that did not try to be less than it was. "The offer letters will go out Friday morning. I genuinely do not know what the panel will decide. I want to be clear about that." "I know," she said. "I believe you." "But whatever they decide," he said, "I would like, if you are open to it, to continue this conversation. Not as CEO and candidate." He stopped. He was not, she realized, a man who was comfortable with incomplete sentences, with leaving space for the other person to fill in a meaning he had not finished stating. This was, she suspected, not a position he often chose voluntarily. "Not as CEO and candidate," she finished for him. "I understand what you mean." He held her gaze. "And?" "And," she said, "I think my coffee is getting cold, and that seems like a waste of a good cup. So if we're going to continue any conversation, we should probably start by finishing this one." He looked at his cup, and then at her, and this time the thing that moved across his face arrived without any management or calibration whatsoever. A full, open expression, the kind that belongs to someone who has been careful for a long time and has just, in a room with a view of the Lagos Lagoon and 2 cups of coffee, decided to stop. The offer letters arrived on Friday at 9 in the morning. Electronic, formal, addressed individually. Adeze was on the bus when her phone lit up with the notification. She opened it standing in the aisle, one hand on the overhead rail, the bus moving in its familiar stop-start rhythm. The other passengers around her carrying their own Friday mornings and their own private stakes. She read the letter. She read it again. Then she held her phone against her chest for a moment. Not dramatically. There was no one watching, and even if there had been, she would have held it the same way. Just the plain physical act of holding a thing that had arrived after a long time of almost. She thought about the coins on the floor of Mama Chisholm's and the seat she had given up in a queue and the money she had taken from the outer pocket of her tote bag. She thought about a document server that started working and a camera that had been recording all along and a notebook with a date on the page and a bus ticket time-stamped at 6:22. She thought about blessing Eze in a stairwell, saying, "Because you were good," in a voice that had no room left in it for anything but the truth. She thought about the ring on an old woman's hand in the early Monday light. She thought about what you see when you look at someone who needs a minute and is not getting one. She had said, someone who needed a minute and was not getting one. And she had given the minute. Not because she expected anything from it, not because she had known what was on the ring, or what the question meant, or what the camera was recording, or what the panel would eventually decide. She had given it because it was available, and because the person needed it, and because she was standing right there. The bus stopped. Her stop. She got off and stood on the pavement in the warm Lagos morning, the city already in full voice around her, and she let herself have it. All of it, the relief and the exhaustion and the thing that had no name yet, but that sat in the chest like the first good breath after a long time underwater. And then she straightened the strap of her tote bag, tucked her phone into her pocket, and walked toward what was next. The last scene belongs to a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks later, when Adeze arrived at Mama Chisholm's at 7:15 on her way to the first day of her new position, not as a candidate, not on assessment, but as a confirmed member of the Okafor Holdings Regional Strategy Team, with a desk on the 6th floor and an access card that worked on the first try. She stood in the queue and ordered 2 meat pies and a bottle of water, and when the cashier, a different teenager this time, with small beads at the ends of her box braids, said, "Next," Adeze moved up and paid, and then she stepped aside and looked at the woman who had come in just after her. An older woman, moving carefully, wearing a print wrapper and carrying a purse she held in both hands. Not Eunice. This was a different woman, unknown, unremarkable by the reckoning of most people in the queue that morning, which was moving the way it always moved, in small, begrudging increments, with everyone behind breathing down your neck and everyone ahead pretending you did not exist. Adeze picked up her bag. She did not think about cameras or assessments or offer letters. She thought about what was available and what was needed, and the fact of standing right there. "Excuse me," she said to the woman in the queue ahead. "Come to the counter. I'll hold your place."